There are some stories that entertain you, some that teach you, and then there are rare stories that quietly open a door inside you. The Alchemist is one of those rare stories. It does not try to impress with complexity or overwhelm with information. Instead, it speaks to the heart in a language that feels ancient, familiar, and deeply human. It whispers truths you always sensed but never fully understood. And it reminds you that every person carries a dream within them, a dream waiting patiently to be followed. This story begins with a shepherd boy named Santiago, but it is not only about him. It is about anyone who has ever felt a quiet longing for something more. It is about the restlessness that appears in moments of silence, the small signs that pull you in unexpected directions, and the courage it takes to leave behind a comfortable life for something greater. The book takes you across fields, marketplaces, deserts, and pyramids, not only in the world outside, but within the world of the heart. As the journey unfolds, Santiago meets people who shape his understanding, faces pests that reveal his strength, and discovers that the universe speaks to those who listen. What begins as a simple search for treasure becomes a journey of transformation, one that teaches him about purpose, love, fear, intuition, and the soul that connects all things. And by following his dream, he learns that the real treasure is not just what you find, but who you become along the way. This summary will take you through that entire journey with clarity and warmth, helping you understand the deeper messages hidden in every step Santiago takes. And as you listen, you may find pieces of your own story reflected in his. Because the path to your personal legend begins the same way his did, with a whisper from the heart. Santiago had always lived between the wide fields of Andalusia, where the sun glowed softly on the hills and the air smelled of warm earth and quiet dreams. He was a shepherd by choice, not by accident. He loved the way each day brought a new landscape, a new sky, a new silence. But beneath this simple routine lived a deeper longing, a quiet restlessness that he could never completely ignore. It was as if something inside him kept whispering that life had more to show him than familiar paths and predictable days. One evening, after guiding his sheep into the ruined church where he often rested, Santiago lay beneath the old sycamore tree growing through the roof. The night was peaceful, filled with the soft breathing of the flock. As sleep drifted over him, he dreamed the same dream he had seen before. Children playing with his sheep, a bright flash of light, and a treasure waiting near the Egyptian pyramids. The dream repeated with the same intensity as if someone was trying to send him a message. When morning came, the dream still sat heavily in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. He had always believed that dreams were the language of the world, a way life spoke to the heart. And this particular dream was too strong, too vivid to ignore. Still unsure, he visited a gypsy woman who interpreted dreams. She listened attentively as he described the vision, and after a long silence, she told him something he didn't expect. The dream was not symbolic or hidden.
It was clear. It meant exactly what it showed. He must travel to the pyramids and search for the treasure buried there. Santiago felt both curious and confused. A treasure? In Egypt? Why him? But even in his confusion, he felt a spark of possibility. Later that day, as he sat thinking about the dream and the gypsy's words, an old man approached him in the marketplace. The man introduced himself as the King of Salem, a name that felt ancient and powerful. Santiago didn't believe him at first, but the man knew things he couldn't possibly know. He knew about Santiago's book, his sheep, and even the exact details of the dream he hadn't shared with anyone besides the gypsy. The king spoke gently, but with a kind of certainty that cut through Santiago's doubts. He explained that every person on earth has a personal legend, a destiny, a dream, a purpose they are born to fulfill. He said what Santiago felt in his heart was the beginning of his personal legend calling him. And then he said something even more surprising, something that would follow Santiago for the rest of his journey. When a person truly desires something with all their heart, the entire universe helps them achieve it. The king gave Santiago 2 stones, Urim and Thummim, meant to guide him when he struggled to read the signs from the world. They were small, simple stones, yet carrying them felt like holding a promise. With these stones in his pocket and the king's words in his heart, Santiago understood that he could no longer pretend he didn't hear the call of his dream. So he made his decision. He sold his sheep, the only life he had ever known, and began traveling toward North Africa. The moment he stepped into Tangier, everything around him changed. The language was unfamiliar, the people dressed differently, and the world felt bigger and more complicated than he had ever imagined. For a moment, he felt the excitement of adventure. But soon, reality tested him. While trying to find a guide, Santiago trusted a young man who spoke Spanish. They walked together through the busy streets, but in a moment of distraction, the young man disappeared, taking all of Santiago's money with him. Suddenly, he was alone in a foreign country with no money, no plan, and no idea how to return home. The world felt like it had collapsed beneath him. Santiago could have given up right there. He could have called himself foolish for believing in a dream. But as he sat in the marketplace, trying to understand what to do, he remembered the king's words. He remembered that all journeys begin with tests. Life wants to know whether you truly want what you say you want. Dreams demand courage. With nothing left, Santiago decided he would not return home defeated. He chose to stay in Tangier and find a way to keep moving forward. Soon he found work at a crystal shop owned by a tired, discouraged merchant. The shop was quiet, dusty, and struggling. Santiago asked for a chance to work there, even if it meant doing the simplest tasks. At first, he only cleaned the dusty crystals, making them shine again. Customers began to notice, and slowly the shop grew livelier. Santiago learned that even small actions done with sincerity can create change. The merchant admired Santiago's spirit, and the two formed a connection, one built on honesty and shared effort. As weeks turned into months, Santiago suggested improvements to the shop. He proposed building a display case on the street to attract customers. Later, he suggested selling tea in crystal glasses, a completely new idea. Each time the merchant hesitated, Santiago gently reminded him that change often brings growth. The merchant agreed, and the shop's business expanded in ways neither of them had imagined. Despite this success, the old merchant lived with a quiet sadness. He had once dreamed of making a pilgrimage to Mecca, but never found the courage to go. Seeing this, Santiago learned one of the most important lessons of his journey. There are people who live with dreams inside their hearts, but never follow them because they are too afraid of losing the life they already know. This realization strengthened Santiago's resolve. He didn't want to become someone who had dreams, but no courage to follow them. After working long enough to rebuild his savings, Santiago stood at another crossroads. He could stay and live a stable, comfortable life, or he could continue toward the pyramids and chase the possibility of treasure, transformation, and a deeper purpose. Comfort tempted him, but the dream called louder. He understood now that comfort was not the same as happiness. Comfort could keep a person safe, but it could also keep them small. With a heart full of gratitude for everything he learned at the crystal shop, Santiago decided to continue his journey. He joined a caravan crossing the desert, and as he traveled deeper into the sands, he felt something shifting inside him. The desert was nothing like the fields of Andalusia. It was vast, silent, and mysterious, almost like a spiritual teacher. As the caravan moved slowly forward, day after day, Santiago found himself listening more closely to the world around him. He watched the patterns of the winds, the way the camels walked, the way the desert held its silence. He learned that the desert forces you to listen, not with your ears, but with your heart. It was in this silence that he began to understand the deeper language of the world. Among the travelers, Santiago met an Englishman who was studying alchemy. The Englishman carried heavy books filled with symbols and formulas. He believed that through knowledge alone he could understand the secrets of alchemy. Santiago, meanwhile, saw the world differently. He believed that learning came not only from books, but from observing life itself. Their contrasting views taught Santiago an important truth. Knowledge must be lived, not just studied. As the caravan moved closer to its destination, Santiago realized that he was no longer the shepherd who once slept under a sycamore tree. He had become someone wiser, braver, and more aware.
He had learned to trust the world, even when it tested him. He had learned to trust his heart, even when it frightened him. And most importantly, he had learned that every step on the journey, good or bad, was guiding him towards something he could not yet see. When he finally told the tribal leaders at the oasis about the vision, they listened carefully. The leaders studied Santiago's face with intense seriousness. It was not common for outsiders to be taken seriously, but the tribesmen understood the language of omens. They agreed to prepare for an attack, warning Santiago that if he were wrong, he would pay with his life. The weight of their decision settled heavily on his shoulders. But Santiago knew he had done the right thing. Fear and truth often walk side by side. A few days later, the attack happened exactly as Santiago had seen. Because of his warning, the oasis defended itself successfully. Santiago's courage saved many lives. The tribal leaders rewarded him with gold and, more importantly, with trust.
For the first time, he felt himself stepping into the deeper layers of his personal legend. He was no longer just a traveler following a dream. He was becoming someone who could read the world and act with purpose. During his time at the oasis, Santiago met Fatima, a young woman whose presence felt like discovering a part of himself he didn't know was missing. She spoke softly, with the calm strength of someone who understood the desert and accepted its ways. Her eyes held a stillness that reminded Santiago of the quiet truths the desert had been teaching him. He fell in love with her, not in a sudden burst of emotion, but in a gentle, steady way, like water finding its way into the cracks of a stone and softening it over time. Fatima taught him something essential. Love does not stand between a person and their destiny. If it does, it is not love. She encouraged him to continue his journey, even though her heart wished he would stay. Santiago felt torn. For the first time, he questioned whether pursuing his treasure was worth leaving someone so important behind. But Fatima understood the desert's wisdom better than he did. "I want you to go so that one day you will return." Her words carried the truth of someone who knew that real love supports rather than restricts. This realization deepened Santiago's understanding of his path. He learned that destiny and love are not enemies. They shape each other. Love gives meaning to the journey, and the journey gives depth to love. He promised Fatima he would return, and she promised she would wait. The oasis became a place of reflection for Santiago. He had come a long way, from a boy with a dream to a young man who could read signs, understand silence, and recognize the voice of his own soul. But he knew the journey was far from over. The pyramid still waited, the treasure still called. And now a deeper calling emerged within him, not just to reach the treasure, but to understand himself fully. His path would soon take a sharper turn, deeper into the mysteries of the desert, towards someone who would change everything, the Alchemist. But even as he prepared for the next step, he felt section 1 of his journey closing gently behind him, like a door he could still look through, but no longer step back into. Everything he had learned, the dream, the king, the robbery, the work at the crystal shop, the desert silence, the visions, and now Fatima, all of it shaped him into someone ready for a greater truth.
As the days in the desert passed, Santiago noticed that the silence around him was not empty at all. It was full, almost alive, carrying a rhythm that he slowly learned to understand. The desert did not speak through words. It spoke through stillness, through the movement of the wind, through the distant shapes of dunes that shifted like thoughts in the mind of the earth. The more he listened, the more he felt himself becoming part of something larger than his own story. The caravan traveled steadily, each camel following the one ahead, forming a line that looked like a single creature moving across an endless sea of sand. Life in the desert demanded patience. The days stretched long, the heat pressed heavily on everyone, and the nights were cold enough to make the stars feel closer than the ground beneath them. Santiago realized that the desert was teaching him the same lesson again and again, to trust the journey, even when he could not see what lay ahead. Among the people traveling with him, the Englishman remained deeply focused on his books. He spent every spare moment reading about the secrets of alchemy, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, the ancient masters who had discovered how to transform metal into gold. Santiago admired his dedication, but also noticed something missing. The Englishman was so absorbed in his books that he rarely looked at the world around him.
He did not watch the camels, the sandstorms, or the way guides interpreted signs in the desert. He believed knowledge could only be found in printed pages. One evening, as they sat by a small fire, the Englishman shared his frustration. He talked about the difficulty of understanding the complex symbols in his books, the hidden language alchemists used to protect their secrets. Santiago listened quietly, then asked a simple question. Have you ever watched the desert? Have you ever tried listening to what it tells you? The Englishman frowned, surprised. He had never considered observing the world directly. The conversation planted a seed in both of them. Santiago realized that true understanding does not come only from books or logic. It comes from paying attention to life itself. And the Englishman realized that knowledge could not be separated from experience. Over the following days, he began lowering his books occasionally to watch the desert, though he still struggled to interpret anything he saw. Santiago found this both amusing and meaningful. The desert was beginning to teach two students at once, each in a different way. As the caravan continued forward, the tension in the air started to grow. The desert tribes were at war, and everyone could sense danger increasing. The caravan leader remained calm but alert. He explained that crossing the desert required complete trust in the guides and absolute silence from everyone else. Santiago felt the caravan's mood shift. The laughter of the early days faded. People spoke less. Hope and fear traveled together in every breath. But in that silence, Santiago felt another kind of awareness awakening inside him. It was as if the fear sharpened the desert, sharpened his intuition as well. He began noticing signs around him without trying. The gestures of the guides, the behavior of the camels, the direction of the wind. He didn't know how he understood these things, but he did. It felt natural, like remembering something he had known long ago but forgotten. One night, as the caravan rested near a cluster of palm trees, Santiago dreamed again. But this dream was different. It was not about treasure or children or pyramids. It showed him a terrible danger approaching the oasis. The next morning, he hesitated, wondering whether he should speak about it. Dreams had brought him this far, but now the stakes felt higher. He remembered Melchizedek's teachings, the stones in his pocket, and the importance of listening to signs. After much internal struggle, he decided to trust his intuition.
After the attack on the oasis and the quiet days that followed, Santiago began to sense that his time there was coming to an end. The oasis had given him safety, love, and an important lesson about trusting visions, but it was never meant to be his final destination. The pyramids still waited beyond the horizon, and the treasure continued to call to him in a way he could no longer ignore. Even the deepest comfort of the oasis could not silence that call. Santiago felt the familiar stirring inside him, the same feeling that first pushed him away from Andalusia. Only now it was stronger, clearer, and grounded in everything he had lived. It was during this time of inward reflection that he met the man people at the oasis whispered about, the Alchemist. Rumors described him as a mysterious traveler who could speak the language of the desert and transform metal into gold. But when Santiago finally stood before him, the man appeared simpler, quieter, and far more human than the legends suggested. Still, there was something powerful about him, an invisible weight in his presence, as if he carried the desert's silence within him. Their first conversation lasted only moments, but it changed Santiago immediately. The alchemist looked at him with an understanding that felt deeper than sight, as though he could see Santiago's past, present, and future all at once. He told Santiago that when someone is on the right path, the universe reveals itself in simple ways. The alchemist explained that Santiago's vision of the attack, his love for Fatima, his decisions, and even his fears were all part of the same journey. Nothing was random, nothing was wasted. Santiago tried to explain his conflict, his love for Fatima, his fear of losing her, and the treasure calling him forward. The alchemist listened patiently, then asked a question that stayed with Santiago long after their meeting. "If you stay, will your heart be at peace?" Santiago didn't need to answer. The silence between them carried the truth. Staying meant betraying the very dream that brought him this far. Leaving meant honoring the deepest part of himself. The alchemist agreed to guide him across the desert. This guidance was not offered lightly. It was earned through Santiago's willingness to listen to the world. The caravan leaders warned them that the journey ahead was dangerous. The desert tribes were growing more violent, and travel was risky. But Santiago understood that the path toward destiny is never free of danger. If it were safe, everyone would walk it. The alchemist simply shrugged at the warnings and said what Santiago already knew. The fear of suffering is worse than suffering itself. They began their journey together, traveling deeper into the desert than Santiago had ever gone. Days became slower, longer, and more demanding. The desert grew wilder, filled with shifting dunes, unexpected storms, and nights dense with stillness. The alchemist rarely spoke, but when he did, his words felt like drops of truth placed directly into Santiago's heart. He taught Santiago that understanding the world required learning its language. Every person, every creature, every grain of sand spoke through signs. When Santiago doubted himself, the alchemist reminded him gently that the world tests all hearts following their personal legend. Only those who continue despite uncertainty discover the true meaning of life. Santiago realized he was learning far more than how to reach a treasure. He was learning how to understand himself. One evening, after a long day of travel, the two sat by a small fire. Santiago admitted he still struggled to understand the idea of the soul of the world, something the Englishman had mentioned many times but never truly grasped. The alchemist explained that the soul of the world is the energy that connects everything. It is the force that allows the desert to speak, omens to appear, and dreams to guide. It is also the same force that moves inside every person. When you follow your personal legend, your soul aligns with this force, and the universe becomes your partner instead of an obstacle. The desert, however, grew more dangerous as they approached tribal territories. One afternoon, they were stopped by armed men who accused them of spying. Santiago felt fear rising inside him like a storm.
But the alchemist stood calm, explaining to the tribesmen that they were simply travelers following the will of the desert. The soldiers took them captive and demanded proof of the alchemist's claim that Santiago possessed unusual abilities. The alchemist promised that within 3 days Santiago would turn himself into the wind. Santiago was stunned and terrified. He had no idea how to perform such a miracle. As the first night passed, fear wrapped around him like a cold cloak, but the alchemist remained calm, telling him that fear reveals how close we are to truth. Santiago spent the next 2 days walking through the desert, speaking to the wind, the sun, and the desert itself. Each refused at first, but as Santiago listened more deeply, he understood something extraordinary. Everything in the world was created by the same hand. Everything was connected by the same soul. On the 3rd day, facing the tribesmen, Santiago closed his eyes and surrendered his fear. He remembered everything he had learned: the dream, the king's words, the omens, the desert's silence, Fatima's love, the guidance of the alchemist, and suddenly he understood that the wind was not separate from him. The desert was not separate from him. The world was not outside him. All were part of the same soul. And with that realization, something inside him shifted. The wind began to rise. It grew stronger and stronger until it became a fierce sandstorm. The tribesmen shielded their faces, stunned by what they saw. Santiago disappeared within the swirling sand, not physically turned into wind, but spiritually united with it. The desert, the sky, and the wind recognized him as one who finally understood their language. When the storm calmed and Santiago returned to the ground, the tribesmen were silent with awe. They released him and the alchemist immediately. Santiago realized that he had crossed the greatest threshold of his journey, not the physical desert, but the barrier within himself. He had broken through fear and entered a space where understanding flowed naturally. With each step closer to the pyramids, Santiago felt lighter. His heart felt open, clear, almost weightless. He was no longer searching for treasure alone. He was searching for understanding. He knew now that the world had been speaking to him all along, and he finally knew how to listen.
The desert felt different after the sandstorm, almost as if it now recognized Santiago, as if they had shared a secret together. The air carried a softness he hadn't noticed before, a quiet acceptance that seemed to rise from the dunes themselves. Santiago felt lighter, as if something inside him had been freed during the moment he became one with the wind. He had crossed an invisible threshold, and though he didn't fully understand what had changed, he sensed that the world looked at him differently now. The alchemist walked beside him in silence, but it was a silence filled with meaning. Santiago didn't need words to understand the man anymore. Their connection had grown deeper through the trials they survived together. There was a calm confidence in the alchemist's presence, the kind that comes from someone who long ago learned to trust life completely. Santiago admired that. He hoped that someday he would carry that same calm inside him, that same grounded certainty.
They continued their journey toward the pyramids, and Santiago noticed something beautiful happening within him. Fear no longer stopped him. It appeared, yes, sometimes in small waves, sometimes in sudden bursts, but it no longer controlled him. It simply passed through him, like wind passing across the dunes. Each step he took felt like a step into a clearer version of himself. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky with deep orange and gold, the alchemist decided it was time for Santiago to understand one of the final lessons. They sat beside a small fire, the desert stretching endlessly around them, and the alchemist began to speak. He explained that every person, every animal, every grain of sand carried within it a story written by the same hand. The world was not divided into separate parts. Everything was connected through the same soul. When a person listened to their heart long enough, they would begin to hear this connection, like a distant melody that grows clearer the more you trust it. Santiago thought about everything he had experienced: the dream beneath the sycamore tree, the old king's wisdom, the robbery, the crystal shop, the Englishman and his books, the desert silence, Fatima's love, the vision of war, the sandstorm. None of these moments were accidents. They were all pieces of the same puzzle. He realized the world had been speaking to him since the very beginning, guiding him through signs and experiences that shaped him in ways he hadn't understood until now. The alchemist watched him quietly, as if he could see the understanding settling into Santiago's heart. He told him that when a person finally recognizes their place in the world becomes clear. Fear fades, doubts dissolve, and the heart speaks with a voice that cannot be mistaken. Santiago nodded slowly. He could feel this truth rising inside him like a tide. Their journey continued into deeper parts of the desert, where the winds blew stronger and the dunes rose higher. Some days were peaceful, with quiet skies and gentle breezes. Other days brought sudden sandstorms that forced them to shelter behind rocks or huddle close to the camels. But through it all, Santiago felt a growing sense of purpose. The pyramids were close now. He could almost feel their presence, as if they were calling him forward with ancient patience. One afternoon, as they neared the edge of the desert, the alchemist stopped abruptly. He turned to Santiago with a calm seriousness and said that their journey together would soon end. Santiago felt a sudden ache in his chest. He had come to depend on the alchemist's guidance, not because he could not walk alone, but because the man had become a symbol of truth for him, a reminder that the world always reveals itself to those who trust it. The alchemist explained that each person must complete their personal legend alone. A guide can show the path, but cannot walk it for you. Santiago understood. He remembered how the king of Salem had appeared at the beginning of his journey, and how the Englishman had shared what he knew. Every teacher had come at the right time, and every teacher had left when their part was complete. Now it was happening again. They walked until the pyramids could be seen from a distance. Sharp, golden shapes rising out of the horizon like silent guardians of time. Santiago felt his heart race. After everything he had endured, after everything he had learned,
He was finally here. The sight filled him with a quiet sense of awe. It was as if the dream that started under the sycamore tree had finally taken form in the real world. But before leaving him, the alchemist had one last lesson to teach. They came across a small monastery at the edge of the desert. Inside, the alchemist showed Santiago how he could transform metal into gold, a skill he rarely used, not for wealth, but to demonstrate a deeper truth. He heated a piece of lead until it glowed red, then waited patiently as it cooled. When the light faded, the lead had become a solid, shining piece of gold. Santiago watched in silence, mesmerized by how something so ordinary could become something so extraordinary. The alchemist smiled at Santiago's amazement. He explained that true alchemy was not about turning metal into gold. That was only a metaphor, a symbol. True alchemy was the transformation of the soul. It was about becoming the purest version of oneself, steady, strong, clear, and shining with purpose. Gold was simply the physical expression of that purity. Santiago felt a deep connection to these words. He thought about how he had changed throughout his journey. He had left behind fear, doubt, and the illusion of comfort. He had learned to read signs, trust his heart, and listen to the world. In many ways, he had experienced his own alchemy. He had been transformed. The next morning, the alchemist gave Santiago a portion of the gold he had created and told him that this was his final gift. They stood in the quiet morning light, the desert stretching endlessly behind them, and the alchemist placed a hand on Santiago's shoulder. He told him that his journey had been blessed since the beginning, and now it was time for him to face the final part alone. He felt both gratitude and sadness. He didn't want to say goodbye, but he also knew that the alchemist was right. The treasure was close, and this last part of the path was his alone to walk. He bowed his head in respect, the way one bows before a great truth, and thanked the alchemist for everything he had taught him. The alchemist smiled, his eyes warm and steady, and then turned and walked back into the desert without looking back. Santiago watched him disappear, feeling a strange mixture of loss and strength. He was ready now, in a way he had never been. The pyramids waited in front of him, tall and ancient, glowing softly in the morning sun. Santiago took a deep breath, feeling the desert behind him, the wind around him, and the treasure ahead. His heart was quiet, not because it had nothing to say, but because it finally trusted the path completely. He stepped forward, carrying everything he had learned in every step he had taken across the desert. The journey was not over yet, but he could feel the final chapter of his personal legend beginning to unfold. The air was soft when Santiago finally stood before the pyramids. The golden stones glowed under the sunlight, rising like sacred mountains carved by time. For a long moment, he just stood there, silent and still, letting the sight sink into him. Every sound seemed distant, the wind brushing the sand, the faint cry of a bird somewhere high above, as if the whole world had paused to witness this moment. It was here that his dream had always pointed him. Every step, every lesson, every hardship had led him to this place. He knelt and touched the warm sand, feeling the pull of everything he had lived through. The faces of everyone who had helped him came to mind. The old king with his patient smile, the crystal merchant who taught him about fear and regret, the Englishman with his books and restless mind, Fatima with her eyes that reflected the desert, and the alchemist who had guided him to the edge of understanding. They were all part of his story, each one a symbol of something he had to learn to reach this moment. He began to dig. Hour after hour, Santiago dug into the sand with his hands. The sun burned his back, but he barely felt it. He could feel his heart pounding, full of hope and exhaustion all at once. The thought of gold, of treasure, of finally seeing what the dream had promised, it pushed him to keep going. But as the night grew darker and the air colder, he realized there was nothing beneath the sand, nothing but emptiness. He kept digging anyway. By dawn, he was tired and desperate. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling. Had he misunderstood the dream? Had the universe betrayed him? In the stillness, he buried his face in his hands and whispered to the wind, "Why? Why did I come so far?" But the desert stayed silent. Only the wind answered, soft, patient, almost comforting, as if reminding him that sometimes answers come in ways we don't expect. At that very moment, a group of men appeared. They looked rough, weary from the desert, their faces hidden behind scarves. They demanded to know what he was doing. When he told them about his dream and the treasure, they laughed harshly. One of them struck him, demanding gold he didn't have. They beat him, searched his bag, and when they found nothing, they mocked him again. As they were leaving, one of the men stopped and said, half laughing, half irritated, "You're a fool. I had a dream once too, about treasure buried in Spain under a sycamore tree growing inside an old church. But I'm not stupid enough to go digging in another country for it." The air was soft when Santiago finally stood before the pyramids. The golden stones glowed under the sunlight, rising like sacred mountains carved by time. For a long moment, he just stood there, silent and still, letting the sight sink into him. Every sound seemed distant, the wind brushing the sand, the faint cry of a bird somewhere high above, as if the whole world had paused to witness this moment. It was here that his dream had always pointed him. Every step, every lesson, every hardship had led him to this place. He knelt and touched the warm sand, feeling the pull of everything he had lived through. The faces of everyone who had helped him came to mind. The old king with his patient smile, the crystal merchant who taught him about fear and regret, the Englishman with his books and restless mind, Fatima with her eyes that reflected the desert, and the alchemist who had guided him to the edge of understanding. They were all part of his story, each one a symbol of something he had to learn to reach this moment. He began to dig. Hour after hour, Santiago dug into the sand with his hands. The sun burned his back, but he barely felt it. He could feel his heart pounding, full of hope and exhaustion all at once. The thought of gold, of treasure, of finally seeing what the dream had promised, it pushed him to keep going. But as the night grew darker and the air colder, he realized there was nothing beneath the sand, nothing but emptiness. He kept digging anyway. By dawn, he was tired and desperate. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling. Had he misunderstood the dream? Had the universe betrayed him? In the stillness, he buried his face in his hands and whispered to the wind, "Why? Why did I come so far?" But the desert stayed silent. Only the wind answered, soft, patient, almost comforting, as if reminding him that sometimes answers come in ways we don't expect. At that very moment, a group of men appeared. They looked rough, weary from the desert, their faces hidden behind scarves. They demanded to know what he was doing. When he told them about his dream and the treasure, they laughed harshly. One of them struck him, demanding gold he didn't have. They beat him, searched his bag, and when they found nothing, they mocked him again. As they were leaving, one of the men stopped and said, half laughing, half irritated, "You're a fool. I had a dream once too, about treasure buried in Spain under a sycamore tree growing inside an old church. But I'm not stupid enough to go digging in another country for it."
And then they left. Santiago lay in the sand, the words echoing inside him. Spain, a sycamore tree, the old church. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he began to laugh. Not the laugh of madness or despair, but of pure realization. The deep, joyful laugh that comes when the universe reveals its final secret. He had traveled the world only to find that the treasure was waiting for him where his journey began. When he returned to Spain, the fields of Andalusia felt both familiar and new. The same hills, the same wind, the same stars. Yet everything looked different because he was different. He had left as a shepherd who dreamed of treasure. He returned as a man who had found something far greater, the meaning of his own life. Inside the ruined church, the sycamore tree still stretched its branches through the broken roof. Santiago knelt beneath it and began to dig one last time. The earth was soft and damp, the air filled with the scent of rain and grass. His hands trembled, but this time not from fear. After a few minutes, his fingers touched something solid. He pulled it out, a chest filled with gold, jewels, and ancient coins that shimmered in the light filtering through the branches. For a long time, he didn't move. He simply stared at it, smiling through tears. The treasure was real, yes, but it was no longer what mattered most. The true treasure had been the journey itself, the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, the courage he had found, and the way he had learned to listen to the world. The gold was only a reminder of what his heart already knew, that the universe always rewards those who follow their dreams with faith. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "Thank you." It was not a thank you to luck or fate or chance, but to the quiet voice of the heart that had guided him through every step. Then he felt it, a gentle breeze brushing his cheek, carrying with it the faint scent of the desert. It was as if the wind itself had come to say farewell, reminding him that every ending is only the beginning of another story. Santiago looked up at the stars through the broken roof and smiled. Tomorrow, he would go back to the oasis. He would see Fatima again. But tonight, he would rest beside the treasure, under the tree where it had all begun, at peace with the world, at peace with himself. He finally understood the secret the alchemist had tried to teach him, that when you follow your personal legend, the universe transforms you. Every sign, every fear, every loss, every joy, all of it shapes you into the person capable of finding what was yours all along. The boy who once dreamed of treasure had become the man who found it within. Thank you for listening to this story on English Amplify. If Santiago's journey touched your heart, remember, your dreams too are waiting for you to believe in them. Follow your purpose, trust your path, and let your heart guide you, just as he did. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to English Amplify for more inspiring stories like this one. Until next time, keep believing in the power of your own legend.